Welcome back to All This Math. This is Professor Parker, and for this particular lesson, we're going to get into a word problem. All right. Now, the word problem itself, as you can see, I did not write the original word problem on the board, but the word problem will be included in the description within this video, word for word, line for line. All right. But I am going to read it out loud so that you'll know what we're working with, and so that I'll know what we're working with. So it goes like this. The length of a rectangular garden. That's key right there. The length and the fact that it's a rectangle. All right, is 1 yard shorter than 3 times its width. Don't get intimidated. Right? Because I got a cheat code to figure out problems like this when they set up just like this. If the perimeter is 78 yards, find the length and the width. So we're trying to find the length and the width of a rectangle, basically. So in a problem like this, what I would suggest you do is first draw a picture. Just draw a rectangle. Just draw a random rectangle on your paper. So I'm gonna draw my rectangle. It's gonna look like this. All right, that's my rectangle. All right, so now, again, and you should really read these word problems repeatedly, okay? So that way you gain a better understanding every time you read it. The length of a rectangular garden is 1 yard shorter than 3 times its width. If the perimeter is 78 yards, find the length and the width. So we know some information. We know the perimeter is 78 yards. So let's write that down. Perimeter equals 78 yards. Now, what is the perimeter? Make sure we know what that means. The perimeter of a rectangle is the length of all 4 sides added together. 1, 2, 3, 4, or however whichever order you want to go in. 1, 2, 3, 4. The perimeter is all 4 sides added together. That's the perimeter. Not to be confused with area. Area is the amount of space inside, or the number of 1 unit by 1 unit squares that could fit inside of the rectangle. Right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the length outside. This edge plus this edge plus that edge plus that edge all adds up to the number 78. All right. Now, another thing you need to know is so we just talked about it, but let's write down the formula for the perimeter of a rectangle. So let's say P is equal to, now we could say L plus W, which is length plus width plus width. We could do that, but we could be a little more sophisticated. We could just say 2L plus 2W. Perimeter is the same thing as, because equal sign means it's the same thing as 2 times the length plus 2 times the width. So that means that 2 times the length plus 2 times the width in this problem is equal to 78, because P is equal to 78. So in this problem, the perimeter of this rectangle is 78. All 4 of these sides added up is 78. And at the same time, the formula for the perimeter of a rectangle holds true. 2 times the length plus 2 times the width. Now let's go back into the problem and read what other information we already had too. The length of the rectangular garden is 1 yard shorter than 3 times its width. So here's the cheat code that I mentioned earlier. And that's why I like these type of problems. I like these type of problems when they set up like this, right? But I didn't like them before. I didn't like them before I found this cheat code for them. Once I found the cheat code, I liked them. It's just like a video game. Once you find a cheat code for a video game, it works every time, and you can beat the level, then you might like the game more. But if you just keep getting beat in the game, then you're not going to like it. Once you find a cheat code, you know how to win. Now it's a different situation. So when you're dealing with a problem, with a word problem, where one thing is compared to another thing, or the size of one thing is compared to the size of another thing, or the amount of one thing is compared to the amount of another thing, I always make the second thing the variable, meaning I make it the X, I make it the W, I make it the Y, whatever. And then the first thing will be represented by an expression based on the second thing. Now, what does that mean? Let me read this again. The length basically is 1 yard shorter than 3 times its width. So the first thing the problem talks about is the length. The second thing the problem talks about is the width. Again, the first thing, when you just read the problem, right? Because reading comprehension is key. We got to read before we can even get into the math. We got to know how to read and know how to understand what we're reading before we even start calculating anything, right? So the first thing that's discussed is the length. The second thing that's discussed is the width. So the way I do it is the second thing is always going to be my variable. So I'm going to just call it W. Because the word width starts with the letter W. So and width is talked about second. So I'm going to represent the width with the variable W, because width was the second thing that got talked about. So the second thing that gets talked about, that's going to be your variable. So W is my variable for this equation. All right. Now, so then with that being said, how do I represent the length? How do I represent the length? So I represent the length like this. I go back to the word problem and I read it. It says the length of a rectangular garden is 1 yard shorter than, 1 yard shorter than. What does that phrase mean? That means less than, which means subtraction. 1 yard shorter than 3 times its width. 3 times means multiplication. 3 times its width, but 1 yard shorter than that. So the 3 times its width part means 3 times W, because W is the width, right? That's what we said. We said the width is W. So if I say 3 times the width, then that's represented by 3W. That's part of this expression. That's part of it. That's not the whole expression. That's just part of it. But then it also says 1 yard shorter than this. 1 yard shorter than this. So 1 yard shorter means you're going to subtract 1 from this. So whenever you see a word problem and it says shorter than, less than, 1 year younger than, that means you subtracting 1, right? I mean, think about it. Shorter than, like if I'm 6 feet tall and somebody is 1 foot shorter than me, how would I figure out their height? I would subtract 1 from my height because they're 1 foot shorter than me. So if I know I'm 6 feet, then shorter than means minus something. And if it's shorter than one foot shorter than, then I would do 6 minus 1 to get the fact that they 5 feet tall. Same thing here. This length is 1 yard shorter than 3 times the width. So you got to understand like how, you got to like really dig how like math is really a language. And a lot of people get caught up in word problems because they don't understand the language. They don't understand like how the phrases translate to mathematical expressions. So 3 times the width is just 3W. 1 yard shorter than is just minus 1. It's just minus 1, right? But you got to do a lot. And the way to get over that issue of not knowing how to translate is you got to do a lot of problems. You got to do a whole lot of problems. It's just like learning the English language. You got to do a bunch of problems and you got to be able to recognize what this word means, what that word means, know what this word means in this context, know what it means in another context. Because in certain situations, the same word spelled the same exact way could mean 10 different things. And we see that all the time. Math is the same way. So now, we know what the length is represented by, 3W minus 1. We know what the width is represented by, W. We also got a formula for perimeter. And what are we trying to figure out? We're trying to figure out what L is and what W is. And we got expressions to represent each of those. And we also know what the perimeter is altogether. So what we know is this. Let's take an inventory of what we know. We know that 78 is equal to, because how I know that's 78? Because P is 78, perimeter is 78. We said that from the rip. We know that the 78 is equal to 2 times whatever this is, which is 3W minus 1, plus 2 times whatever this is, which is just W. And that's our equation. Now, why is it important to have expressions that got the same variable in it? Because if we got 2 different variables, we can't solve for nothing. Meaning we can't solve in the sense that we can't find out an exact number that is equal to those variables. We can find an expression that it still includes a variable in it, but we don't want that. We want the actual numbers because the problem says find the length and width. So when the problem says find the length and width, that means we want to find the exact amount of yards that the length is. We want to find the exact amount of yards that the width is. So now we're about to set up the equation. So we're going to rewrite this one right here. P equals 2L plus 2W. So we're going to do this, right? We're going to do 78 is equal to 2 times, and L is this expression right here. But you got to put it in parentheses. Because if you don't put it in parentheses, that means you're just doing 2 times the 3W. But you got to do 2 times this whole thing, the whole 3W minus 1. Then you follow the formula, put your plus sign. Then you put another 2, and you put a W. That's your equation. That's your equation. So what you got to know how to do is you got to know how to read a word problem and then understand the information in the word problem. Pick variables or variable expressions for your information in the word problem, and then create your equation. Once you create your equation, in my opinion, the hard part is over, because now we're just doing some basic like algebra just to solve for the variable. And once we solve for one variable, then we can go back and figure out what the other variable is. So we're about to figure out what the width is first. So what I'm gonna do over here is I'm gonna use distributive property right here with the 2. It's gonna be 6W minus 2. Don't forget to multiply by the -1. A lot of people do that. A lot of people, they don't distribute right. They'll do the 2 times the first term and not times the second. Don't be that person, right? And then I'm gonna just bring down the 2W, bring down the 78, and now I'm gonna combine like terms. This 6W and this 2W, they're gonna go together. So we don't need a whole bunch of W's. We could just combine them into one term. Because if you got 6 W's right here and 2 W's right here, all together, that's 8 W's. So we got 8W minus 2 is equal to 78. Now I'm trying to get 8W by itself first. First, I'm trying to get the 8W by itself. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get rid of this -2. The opposite of subtracting 2 is adding 2. That's how we get rid of things when we solve equations. We do the opposite operation. So I'm gonna do +2, but also if I do it on the right-hand side, I gotta do it on the left-hand side. So +2 on the right and +2 on the left, they cancel out. We got 80 is equal to 8W. Now I'm trying to get W by itself now. First I was trying to get 8W by itself. Now I'm trying to get W by itself. So now I'm trying to get rid of this 8. So the way I do that is I'm gonna divide by 8 on each side. I'm gonna divide by 8 on the right. I'm gonna divide by 8 on the left. So I'm gonna divide by 8 because that's the opposite of multiplication, division. And I gotta keep it balanced, so I gotta divide on both sides. Boom, boom, 1, 1. 80 divided by 8 is 10. I'm gonna bring them up here. 10 is equal to W. That means the width of this rectangle is 10 yards. The width of this rectangle is 10 yards. Right? So we can put the 10 here and the 10 there. All right, now we gotta find the length. Now the length is equal to 3 times the width minus 1. 3 times the width minus 1. So I use this to figure out what the length is. So the length, I'm gonna call that L, is equal to 3 times, and I don't need W no more. You know why? Because I know what W is. It's 10 yards. So we do 3 times 10 minus 1. So 3 times 10 is gonna be 30. Follow order of operations. 30, take away 1, that's 29. So that's also 20, that's 29 yards. So this is 10 yards. The width is 10 yards, the length is 29 yards. So this is 29 and this is 29. Now that's what I think it is, but we don't know it's right until we check it. We're not done until we check our work. So if we knew from the beginning that the perimeter was 78 yards, all 4 of these sides should add up to 78. If they don't, we did something wrong. We got to check our work. So let's say, what's 29 plus 29? 20 and 20 is 40. 9 and 9 is 18. 40 and 18 is 58. So this side plus this side is 58. Then that's 10 and that's 10 and that's 20. So what's 58 plus 20? 58 plus 20 is 78. So we good. We good. We good money. So the width is 10 yards. The length is 29 yards. Now, if this was a multiple choice question and you didn't know how to do all this algebra, what I would suggest you do, and this is a test taking strategy you can use on the SAT. You can use this on the SAT, right? What I would suggest you do is just try to back solve, just take the answers and plug them in, because you know the perimeter is 78. So if you know, at least know this formula, and you know how to find the perimeter of any rectangle, you just do 2 times the length plus 2 times the width, right? And it should add up to 78. But you got to make sure that the right number is the width and the right number is the length, because if you flip the numbers, right, and you said the width was 29 and the length was 10, you would still get 78, but that wouldn't be right. You know why? Because the problem said that the length is 1 yard shorter than 3 times the width, right? 1 yard shorter than 3 times the width. So that means the length has to be 29. The length can't be 10. The length can't be 10 because 10 is not 3 times 29 minus 1. It's just not. It's just not. So you got to be careful. If you back solve and use that method, you know, then you got to be careful. You got to make sure you put the numbers in the right place. Make sure the 10 goes with the width and the 29 goes with the length. So be very careful with that. But like I said, I just want to recap this one part, because when you see a problem like this, I like these problems. When you see a problem where some value is compared to another value, some amount is compared to another amount, something is twice as big as something, something is 3 feet smaller than something, something is, somebody is like 10 years older than somebody or something. Whenever you see a word problem set up like that, I'm telling you, and you don't got to do it like this. This is just my way to do it. And somebody else might tell you another way, and that's cool too. I'm all for diversity of methods of approaching math, right? But check this out. The second thing that's discussed in the problem, I always make that the variable. So in this problem, the width was expressed second, because it said the length of a rectangular garden is 1 yard shorter than 3 times its width. The length got talked about first. The width got talked about second. The length got talked about first. The width got talked about second. So because the width got discussed second, I'm calling that the variable. Width is W. I'm calling it W. I mean, you could call it X. You can call it any variable you want. But then from there, I say, okay, well, then I go back into the problem and I read it again. And then I say, okay, well, how would I describe the length if the width is W? If the length is 1 yard shorter than, and I got to know what that means. 1 yard shorter than means -1. I'm doing -1. I'm doing something -1. 1 yard shorter than what? 3 times its width. So 3 times its width, the word times mean multiply. You already know that. Times mean multiply. So that's 3W. 3 times the width, 1 yard shorter than is -1. Boom. Once you got your expressions to represent width and length, go back to the perimeter formula, because this is talking about perimeter. So when it's talking about perimeter, know what your formula is. If it had been talking about area, we would use a different formula. Length times width. Right? So that's how it goes. That's how it goes, right? Just know your formulas, whether you're talking about circles, trapezoids, triangles, rhombuses, other types of parallelograms, squares, whatever we talking about. We talking about volume of three-dimensional shapes, whatever. Like, just know your formulas. Know your formulas. Pick your variables and your variable expressions to represent the different parts, and then just plug everything in like we did here. Once you set up your equation, I'm telling you, once you set up your equation, the hard work is done. The hardest part is reading the word problem, taking the information from the word problem, and setting up an equation. Well, first, identifying your information with expressions, and then setting up your equation. Once that's done, this light right here, this algebra 1 right here. This is little distributive property, little combining like terms, little addition property of equality on both sides, add the 2, then multiplication property of equality to get rid of the 8. And then, then you take that, plug it into the other expression, figure out what the length is. And then, but you got to check your work though. You got to check your work. And we checked our work. We know 29 plus 29 plus 10 plus 10 is 78 all day long. All right. But again, get some practice. Like, watching this video ain't enough. You got to get some practice. You got to get your hands dirty, roll your sleeves up, and go in on a bunch of problems that look just like this. So ask your teacher, ask your professor, or just go online and look up word problems involving, I don't know, comparative values. I don't even know what the specific terminology to describe these types of word problems would be. But your teacher or your professor would know. They would definitely be able. They should be able to let you know. And actually, that's something I need to find out, because I need to know for real. But anyway, go get some more of these problems. Do some practice. Use this video as a guide. And I'll check up with you in the next video. Peace.